Okay, let's talk a bit about generative AI, ChatGPT, BingAI, all of these new things that everybody's talking about. There's a lot of excitement, which is really good. There's a bunch of caution, which is also really good. But there's also seems to be just a lack of basic understanding about how these systems are built, how they're trained, and what they're good for, what they're not good for. So the mission of this video is to give you a bit better understanding. All right, let's get going. So, first of all, the number one thing to think about is to beware. So I'm going to walk through some examples from BingAI that are from Dmitry Brereton and his website dkb.blog. Check it out, but grab some of those screenshots and I'll explain what's going on here. So he went through and did some wonderful work checking out BingAI and asking it questions and finding problems. So what's going on here? He asked, what's today's date? BingAI gets that right. At the time, it was February 12th. Then he said, so Avatar must be released if it came out on 16 December 2022. And then BingAI got that one wrong because it said no, it hadn't been released because it was scheduled to be released on December 16th, which is in the future. So today is February 12th, 2023, which is before December 16, 2022. You have to wait for about 10 months until the movie comes out. So at least at this point, BingAI has real problems with dates, which is a reliability issue you should really be watching out for. All right, next, he asks BingAI for some recommendations on vacuums. Seems like a pretty good, useful thing. Here's the problem. If you look down on the right side in the corner, kind of right next to my head here, it says it has a limited suction power and a short cord length of 16 feet. That's actually not true. That's not that those cons don't exist. What's really worrying and is fooling a whole bunch of people is up here. Sorry for the lack of green screen today. You'll see the one, which is a footnote that points you out to a source. But if you go through to that source, which is an article in HGTV, you'll find out that the cons that are listed here aren't in that article. So you get the idea that it's actually giving you a source and it's tied to it, but it's not. And I'll walk through in a little bit about why that is the case. Next up here, it's just hallucinating what the results of the Super Bowl. Much to the disappointment of those in Philadelphia, the Eagles did not win, but BingAI seems to think that the Eagles won. Next up here, this one's fascinating. He asks, why did Google's AI bot fail? If you followed the news here, Google's Bard came out and there was a big splash. There was a video and there was an error in the video. And so he asked, what was the error? Well, it then says that the Bard was asked, how many countries are in the European Union? It answers 27, and the correct answer is 26. Whole bunch of problems here. That was not the question that was asked of Google's Bard. The question was around James Webb's telescope and what you could tell a 9-year-old about it. So Google the Bing AI gets the question wrong. It also gets the answer wrong because the correct answer actually is 27. It's not 26 because Croatia is still in the EU. Okay, next up, he asked Bing AI for a bunch of financial results from recent earnings releases. This should be pretty simple. It's taking data out of a table that exists. Proves to be difficult, and a whole bunch of numbers on these two slides are wrong. Dimitri goes through this in great detail, so go check it out. But one, just to highlight, the operating margin for GAAP is not 5.9%. That number doesn't even exist in the financial results, so I'm not quite sure where it's grabbing that number, but we'll go through a little bit about where some of this may be coming from and why this is potentially a long-term problem. Now, these kinds of results and this kind of making stuff up is actually not unknown, and not unknown to the people at OpenAI who created this technology. Here's some information that came. It was an interesting research piece that came out from some folks from Oxford and somebody from OpenAI, and they went through and they tried to find a way to establish a truth system for it. Like, can you actually rank various large language models by how well they actually tell the truth? And they asked it a whole series of questions, several hundred questions. Let me look it up here. It's actually 817 questions that span 38 categories: health, law, finance, politics, and they were looking to create some sort of benchmark in truthful and generating answers. And you can see here the answers that they, when they were doing this research, came back false from GPT-3, which is the slight predecessor to ChatGPT. ChatGPT is based on GPT 3.5. BingAI is apparently based on GPT 4. But either way, the systems and the way they're built and how they're trained is all the same. So you're going to have a whole bunch of these same problems. If you look here, what they did is they tried to ask it a bunch of questions where there is sort of common misperception and common errors. And what they found is that using these benchmark questions, that the best model was truthful on 58% of questions, whereas human performance is 94%. What's also potentially more worrying is that the truthfulness declined as the model got larger. So the more evolved, models are farther to the left on this chart in blue, and you can see the numbers at the bottom. That's the number of parameters or weights that are in the model, and you can see that the accuracy goes down as it gets bigger. So what's really going on here? Let's take a step back. Let's walk through what generative AI actually is, how it's trained, how it's built. That'll help you answer some of these questions. So generative AI, it's AI that generates stuff. Now, why is this important? What's interesting? There's one guiding principle that we always teach everybody about AI to help understand and put everything in a frame of reference, and it's especially important for generative AI. We humans are really smart. We got all kinds of things going on in our brains, but we have a core limitation, is that we think in 1, 2, or 3 dimensions. 4 is like really hard to conceptualize, but that's kind of where we are. Machines, however, can basically think in unlimited dimensions. This is a 6D cube in a 4D space. We can't even think about what that is. That's sort of child's play, if you will, for machines. And this multidimensional space is really important in understanding how generative AI is trained and how it comes up with the answers it comes up with. So, generative AI, what is it? Generative AI can generate new data, text, images, audio, video, all kinds of different content. The goal is to reproduce something similar to a training set, but without replicating it. And it's important because it actually doesn't have the data in it to actually replicate it. There's a variety of technologies that are involved: RNNs, LSTMs, GANs, transformers. Transformers is what we're looking at today when we're looking at ChatGPT, but there's a whole bunch of connection to these previous kinds of neural networks, and frequently in these systems there's lots of different things going on. But just those are the kinds of terms you want to sort of be familiar with. It's really important to understand these are probabilistic systems, and based on them being a probabilistic system, they will never be 100% accurate. They're always predicting something, and there's always some error rate built into how they're predicting. Finally, these systems are basically called bullshitters. They're not concerned with the truth. That's not the objective of the system. They're not lying, which means that they have which is where you have an intention to mislead. They're just not concerned with the truth. They're not checking for truth. That's really, really important to consider. By the way, this image was created by DALL-E, by me, when I prompted it to give me a picture of a robot telling a story to a gullible human. So apparently DALL-E thinks gullible humans are children. Actually, all of the answers I got had little kids in them. That's what it is. All right, so let's turn our attention to ChatGPT, since that's kind of the key topic of today, but it's especially the topic of this video. So ChatGPT is a system from OpenAI. It's what's called a large language model. On the left side, you can see what the interface looks like when you go to it and you put in a prompt in that bar on the bottom. On the right is an example of something that comes out of it. So I asked it to write a blog post about how ChatGPT works, and this whole string comes out of it. If you ask it the same question, if you give it the same prompt 2 times in a row, all of the text will be different. Well, at least most of it will be different. That's based on how it's actually built. The system is built to predict the next word, and the predictions change over time. I'll talk about why that is their case. But you can go try it out yourself. You can have a free account, pull it up. It'll give you a different blog post each time you give it the prompt. That's important. There is not one answer inside the system. There's not one correct answer. It's generating that answer based on the prompt at any given moment. Okay, so that's what it looks like. It'll scroll through the text as it rolls it out. It's fun. You can do all kinds of things with it. You've probably seen a whole bunch of examples. I've done interesting things from everything from asking for marketing, pitches and taglines to see what it comes up with, to writing proposals, to writing poetry. You can ask it to do things in the style of. So I asked it to write a song lyrics for Helen in the style of Bruce Springsteen. It's not bad. It's not actually as good as The Boss, but it's pretty good. And you notice that it sits there and calls, and he knows enough about Bruce to say that she's a Jersey girl, which she isn't. But anyway, that's sort of the kind of fun things you can do. Okay, so how does this thing work? Where does it come from? So the first thing to know is that first step in terms of training, it is trained on a lot of words. And the first step for these systems is to try and learn words. So there's a few 100 billion words apparently that went into the training system. Out of that comes 175 billion weights or parameters, they're calling it. That's important. So what happens here is it's looking at all of these words, and it's creating a whole bunch of associations among them. The couple of core terms to be familiar with. One is called embedding, and this is when it's putting all of these words into a massive multidimensional space. Some of my images here are from Stephen Wolfram, who wrote a great long piece about ChatGPT. So credit to him for some of this stuff here. And if you want to read it, it's supposed to be like an hour and a half of reading. It's well done, and it's worthwhile reading. So this embedding puts words in space based on their associations from each other and gives a mathematical number to everything. So it calculates a number for each word and therefore then uses that math to predict the next word. A couple things that are important. One is it does not come across in a 2D space like this. All the words are in this massive multidimensional space that I said at the beginning. We don't have the ability to conceptualize in our minds, but it's there. The other thing is it does not have all of this text in its memory anywhere. Like the internet is not sitting on OpenAI servers. It's the mathematical representation of the text in the way that it wants to know it. That's important. When it's giving you an answer, it's not like it's looking up text to figure out what the answer is. Right? It's taking all of this aggregated information and all of this mathematical calculations, and it's predicting the next word based on that space in that space. So you can see what it can do. Like I asked it to fill in the one word, the blank cat, and it gives a whole bunch of different answers, right? So there's different options. So the black cat, the sleepy cat, the curious cat. Then you ask it again, and it gives a different list, right? That's a key thing. We're going to get to that. So what happens? So out of this embedding, the second key concept is attention. So one of the sort of magic parts of the transformer in here is that you take this huge multidimensional space, you take a mathematical number representing the word that is sitting there, and then it predicts what the next best word is based on all of the associations that it's learned through looking at a few 100 billion words across, countless, I don't know how many, texts, however you calculate it. Now, the attention part's important. Early on, language generators would take word and then just pick out the next word, and you'd end up with these sentences that early on were kind of nonsensical. The big leap that's happened that we're seeing here is that it has an ability to pay attention to what's happened before. And the more it can pay attention, the more associations it can build and understand what next word might make more sense. And that's really sort of a key thing that why we're seeing such a great human-like text is that attention mechanism. Anyway, that's kind of the magic that transforms into the answer. So, second major step of the training is now that it's learned words and it can predict the next word, it works through a reinforcement learning with human feedback system. And I love this phrase. I think this was from Wolfram, who said the next step is to be a good chatbot. So how do you actually learn how to do that? The first step was they went through and they had some human feedback. So it would generate sentences, and the human would rate it based on a variety of different characteristics. and whether it was a good answer, et cetera, et cetera. The second step was that ChatGPT would then create a policy, essentially, to say these are good answers. Finally, it then has the reinforcement learning process, which is a process of seeking an objective. So reinforcement learning really is an advanced but a relatively common way of method for machine learning, where you're not explicitly giving instructions to the machine, you're giving it a goal over time, and then the machine has to figure out how to get there. A good example of this is in self-driving cars. You tell the car to drive from point A to point B and don't hit anything. Now, you're not explicitly telling it what to do in every situation because there's too many roads and too many obstacles to specifically program what to do. So you're giving it that objective, and it has to learn. That reinforcement learning, it's a lot of how we humans learn, pretty common, it's sort of a good parallel. That's how this system's learning, and it's learning against a policy that it created based on human feedback. That's why it's reinforcement learning with human feedback. So what happens when you actually get in there and you give it a prompt? It's looking to to add another word at a time. It's not actually a word, it's actually a token, because sometimes the tokens are a single word, sometimes they're multiple words, sometimes they're parts of words, which is why on rare occasions it can make up words, because a token is like pre, and then it will, instead of pre-learn or something like that, it would create a word that, that doesn't make any sense. What you see on the slide here is I gave it a prompt that said the best thing, this is actually from Wolfram, sorry. The best thing about AI is its ability to, and there's a list of predictions. And I believe that this list of predictions actually came out of GPT-2 that Wolfram was working with, but still it's useful to see there's different ratings of the probabilities for what the next best word is. Now this is the next thing that's really, really, really important. The system is designed to not pick the number one answer. So it's not going to pick the number one most highly predicted word. It's actually going to pick something slightly lower on average over the string of text that it's creating. This is called a temperature rating. According to Wolfram, it's 0.8, and that 0.8 is important. In my mind, what that means is that we're replacing evolved ambiguity that we have as naturally as humans. Every time we speak, we don't speak exactly the same. I'm talking to you differently than I talk to Helen, or it's different how I talk to when I'm having a conversation about something specific, like a legal matter or a medical matter. We have different ways, and we're using language in different ways. But we are sort of ambiguous, and that's actually kind of important, because it's how we actually communicate really well with each other. We put our language out there, somebody asks us a question, we respond a little bit more, etc. So we're not always using like the perfect answer, if you will, and that's been embedded in ChatGPT, and that's that statistical randomness. That's why when I showed you the answer and I told you before, if you ask the same prompt, it'll come back with a different answer each time. That's one of the key reasons, because it's aiming for 0.8 rather than 1.0, which would be like picking the most predicted answer every time. It's aiming for 0.8 over a period of time. And so that randomness is why you end up with different answers when you ask the same prompt. That will also mean that you end up with random errors at times, and it's definitely strange. So there is a key advantage here, which is that randomness creates human-like variability, right? So as I said, the chart just above my head, the table just above my head, that's the one from Wolfram, what he said, here's the answer to completing the sentence, the best thing about AI is its ability to. Then over on the left, I did the same thing. I put in a prompt, complete the sentence. The best thing about AI is its ability to, and you can see the three answers: process and analyze, adapt and learn, augment human intelligence. None of those are on the table. There's always some level of variability. That means one of the key reasons why we're so excited about ChatGPT is because it's human-like. And that human-like variability comes through this temperature rating and this ability to look across space, right? So that's a key thing. Now, an important part to remember is that good grammar, which is essentially what we've gotten out of ChatGPT, on the left, these are again from Wolfram, is great, right? It shows that it actually can produce good language and good grammar and come back with appropriate sentences. probably better than what I'm using in the video, but it doesn't mean that it understands what anything means. Now, this is a nice word space that he created here that's showing all the different sort of uses of the word crane. And it's a nice, it's a 2D, again, it's represented in 2D, which is not how these systems are actually represented, but it can show you the lots of different reasons. And what's there is that sometimes it's a crane, meaning a mechanistic thing that picks stuff up. Sometimes it's a crane, which is a bird. And I went through and asked ChatGPT a whole bunch of things about write me a description of a crane, and every time it was mechanical. And then I said, you're not giving me any examples of Crane the bird. He was like, oh, yeah, you're right, I'm not. Well, here's a description of Crane the bird. Go back and ask it again. What about a crane? And I keep coming back with all the answers in mechanical. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here where it doesn't understand what you mean, because meaning is something that we apply with context and intent. And these systems don't have the same ability to have intent or context. There is some level of things that comes through in terms of remembering conversations over a short span of time, and those are different based on the systems and how long it can remember what you're saying to it. But we're missing that. And without meaning, errors are inevitable, which also means fundamentally you can't trust the answers that come out of the systems. Here's 2 examples. On the left, I asked it to write a biography of Bruce Springsteen. What did I get? Look at that sentence. He has published 2 best-selling books, Born to Run and Springsteen on Broadway. Correct. He published the best-selling book, Born to Run. By the way, it's a great book. And if you haven't read it, you really should. I mean, the boss can write. The second is Springsteen on Broadway. It's not a book. It was a show. It's a video. There's a whole bunch of stuff. There's an album. But it's not a book. Right? But it's not, so it doesn't have any ability to know that is actually, to know what that means. It also doesn't have the ability to do any fact checking. God, do not think that these systems can fact check. Do not think that the little icon for the footnote in Bing says that it's checked the facts, because it's not. That's not how the systems are generating their text. They're not looking at original text. Remember what I said at the beginning? The original text does not exist in its memory. It's not on the servers on OpenAI. It's not going out and pinging the world to look for text. It's created a mathematical representation of a few hundred billion words and generating text based on that. It also, inside of it, has no ability for fact checking. Fact checking is really, really hard. Maybe in another video, describe why it's ridiculously hard, but it's actually not possible. So the other text that's above my head is great. I asked it to write a book review for the book Make Better Decisions by Helen Edwards and Dave Edwards. Now, that's a book that Helen and I published in September of last year. Now, this is a little bit of a gotcha question because we know that ChatGPT's training stopped at the end of 2021. So this book didn't exist at the time that it had pulled together all of its information. But what does it do? It writes a really nice long book review for a book that it's never heard of. It doesn't know anything about. It doesn't tell me that it's never heard of this book. Doesn't tell me that it doesn't know who Helen and I are. And it just writes a long book review, which actually has nothing to do with the book we wrote. I mean, it sounds a little bit because, you're going to get some sense about, decision making, but it's not about our book. So why is this all so important to remember? One of the key things is meaning, which is what we need to have in order to have reliable text and have good conversations. Meaning comes from the space between us humans when we communicate. We say something, we get a response back, we reply back. That conversation, when we're trying to describe something, when we're trying to explain something, when we're trying to teach someone something, when we're trying to pitch them on some new idea, that all comes from the interaction between us, and there's no ability for that to happen with a system like ChatGPT. It's very powerful. It's really compelling, human-like language, but you gotta understand the limitations. So I'll leave you one final idea. A lot of vendors are asking, how can we apply the solution to our problems? A lot of companies are asking, how are we going to apply the solution to our problems? A question that we'd phrase instead: do we have any problems that can be solved with machine-generated content, knowing that the machine has no sense of intent or context and will always have errors because it is driven by randomness to be human-like rather than human-centered? It's not designed to solve our problems. It's designed to sound like us. So is it possible? Do we have problems where what we need is a machine to sound human-like? Because it's not actually centered on solving problems that we have. And it's not centered around being truthful or factually accurate. Let us know if you've got any questions. Thanks a lot.